Now, I don't know how much of this information has been publicized, whether it's proper to publicize it or not, whether it can be quoted out of context or whatever.
Well, I think the problem would be in making a statement like this, there would have to be some type of documentation, which would be very difficult to come by, because I'm sure those people who worked in the Jewish agency would never talk about it, and you can find many people who said that they wanted to come anyway, whether the...
Well, there were those who wanted to come for ideological reasons.
Yeah.
Others who wanted to come because they felt that was the only way to fight back and defend themselves as Jews. There are others, and I think this may have been true of the younger men, who wanted to get out as quickly as they could, so that when they had a chance to go, when there was a giyus, I forget when it started, must have been April, after the state was established, when there was a giyus. I don't know how good the response was. There was a response. I don't know what percentage of the military-age bachelors, let's say, signed up for a giyus. But there was a lot of publicity in the camps, and a lot of interest engendered. I'm sure they didn't get as many as they wanted. They may, I don't know whether they got more than they had a right to expect.
Were there any other illegal activities that you were involved in that you would like to tell me about?
Well, there was the transportation of people, which would involve, the JDC used to do this, sometimes Klausner, for example, would use American military facilities.
Now we're talking, which period?
This was Brechar.
Okay.
This was in 1947.
Okay.
Where people would be gotten out of Romania. That was the big place of emigration. I think I described it in the book. Through Brechar, and suddenly reappear in a DP camp, say, in Frankfurt. Word would reach us that 300 people are coming in tonight. The Jewish agency would take care of the transportation, joint.
How would they have transportation?
They had their own vehicles. In most cases, except this case where this friend of mine was caught on the border, the smuggling of people and the smuggling of equipment was not done the way it is in movies and TV. I think I mentioned in the book also. When you smuggle people or equipment, you have false documents. So you can have a whole transport of 15 joint trucks, let's say. And the documentation that they have, signed and sealed by all the authorities, these are people being transferred from one camp to another under the authority of Army authority, so-and-so. The document may be forged, but the average MP and average policeman isn't going to bother with it. And if they get this forged document, in many cases the fellow who was at the head of the convoy or the transport would have another document which he was only supposed to open in cases of real emergency. And this document might be something from somebody else who was higher. It may have been something legal coming from higher up on the level, which was authorizing this, but the middle echelon wasn't supposed to know that it was being authorized. So that the backup document might very well have been really legal, but you weren't supposed to use it unless you really needed it.
So in other words, you were working with the top and skipping the middle.
That's how a lot of it was done. Same as a big industry can get an okay from a cabinet member of the United States to sell the wheat to Russia. You get the okay from way up top.
Right.
The guys in the middle don't want it. The guys at the bottom get the stock. Well, what can we do?
Right.
But the people in the middle, and this became open knowledge. But the same sort of thing is done when it comes to smuggling. Same as smuggling equipment into Palestine. When I was in Israel, there were big crates of agricultural equipment being shipped from South Africa to England. On the ship's manifest, it was listed as agricultural equipment. When a customs inspector comes on a ship, he's not going to examine everything. You have a manifest. There's 500 crates of agricultural equipment. Okay. Once in a while, if someone informs, or if the wind is up, they will inspect. If it's at the bottom level, usually a little money will help. That was done with people. If a German policeman stopped the whole convoy, and he said, well, I can't read this English document, what's it all about? And the fellow in charge tried to explain, well, this is authorized by the American Army. Well, maybe I better call in my sergeant. 2 or 3 cartons of cigarettes will persuade him that the document is legal. I remember when the transport that I was traveling in was stopped by a strike, supposedly a strike on the French railroad going from, I don't remember whether it travels through Switzerland or Italy. We got to the French border. They had to give the trainman. The people, as I understood it then, would be taken out of, say, Romania by the Brecha group. And I would assume that the way they got across the border were, as I described before, most of the time with forged documents. I remember once stopping a truck that was selling oranges in a DP camp. And he had all sorts of documentation showing that he had legal authority all the way from Spain to come sell in a DP camp. I wasn't going to take the time out to examine the documents carefully. And I think that most law enforcement people at the bottom level, customs officials, MPs in the army, ordinary police, state troopers, work on that level. You flash an identity card at somebody. He doesn't know whether it's authentic or not. So that documentation, customs, bills of lading, letters authorizing the transport of 300 or 400 people could be made out. I don't even know if you'd call it forging. In some cases, not even imitating the official documentation. So that once a group got across the border, either going around the back way, the way you usually think of infiltrators, like the fellow in Ride a Pale Horse in the Spanish War, where he's dropped off a few miles from the Spanish border, and then he's picked up a few miles in the Spanish border. The car goes right through somebody driving with official documents, but this poor fellow has to go across the snowy mountains, roundabout. The documentation is usually what gets a thing across. The Brecha people would get into, let's say, the American zone, or they might have to travel through the Russian zone and get into the American zone. Sometimes if you gave documentation showing that they were just in transit, they wouldn't bother you, because, well, let the people in the American zone worry when they get there. If this paper from an American general says that they're supposed to, he's expecting them in Frankfurt, let's let them through. They would come, say, to Jägerkaserne. They would be given new identification.
For the record, let's spell that, because the...
Jaeger.
Okay.
It's a German word. Kaserne is barracks. Jägerkaserne would be the hunter's barracks, which was the name of an army barracks inside. I don't remember now whether it's inside or at the edge of Frankfurt on Main.
Okay.
Nobody ever died in a DP camp, Jewish or Arab. The refugee camps, nobody dies, because the identity documents are kept. If anyone dies, they're kept. I myself went through 3 changes of name. The camp in Jägerkaserne would get identity documents from a central depot. Where it was, I don't know if I can trust you to say where it was. But they would get the identity documents in Munich, where DPs who were leaving Europe would give up their identity documents. Those would be shipped back to the DP camps. The camp authorities, or somebody working for the Jewish Agency, or somebody working for Joint, in a non-official capacity, would have these identity documents. When a sudden group of 300 people came in from Romania, these people would get these new identity documents. They would have been on the rolls, these names would have been on the rolls for several months as a resident of this Jägerkaserne. So that, when did you get here? Well, the date says that it was my own David Shupak was here since 1946. Are you David Shupak? Yes. Yeah, I guess you've been here since 40. The guy got there 2 days earlier. They would have housing, space available for them. So that if they got in, I remember one time 300 or 400 came in about 10 o'clock at night. The next morning, you would swear they didn't put artificial cobwebs, but the floors were pretty dirty and everything, as though they had been there. And these people, having lived this way, knew how to adapt to these conditions. Now, I myself had 3 names. When I went to Munich I was given the name David Shupak. Then when we boarded the ship in Marseille, we traveled on a group visa. As we got on the ship, the night before, somebody came to us, I think it was from a Jewish agency, and said, "You're Sorty Lippman. You're somebody else, somebody else." If they ask you when you get on the ship for your name, and there was a list of names. This is a list of people who left in the previous boat, or a boat all the way back. They said, "What's your name?" I said, "See, Sorty Lippman." I was speaking a broken Yiddish. "Sorty Lippman is written on my luggage." The other DPs didn't even bother with that subject. I did. I wrote my name, new name, on my luggage. He looked through the list. "Oh, yeah, Sorty Lippman, you go to this and that bed and such hold of the ship." The 300 or 400, whose places they took, may have left in the course of the last few weeks in small groups. 10 people going ostensibly for medical examination in a DP camp outside Munich. 30 going on a convention in Bergen-Belsen. Now, in Bergen-Belsen, the British authorities weren't going to go around and say, "Did you just get here from the American zone?" And then they could be transshipped from there. I had it rather easy when I was in Munich waiting for a transport that I would join. I lived in the quarters that the Jewish agency workers lived in. I think there were 4 rooms or something of that sort. The other DPs were living in a DP camp and waiting till the transport could be organized. When it was organized, I mentioned this in my book, I was in a compartment on the train. We were on the train for about 3 days. I was in a compartment with 2 Jewish agency people who had gone underground. They had been working with the identities of DPs for about 2 or 3 years. And they were traveling home again, using the identity of DPs because their original identities had already been filled. They had taken the place of somebody in a DP camp who returned to Israel legally, but illegally, using an assumed identity. Now this chaplain that I mentioned, he had lent his passport to somebody.
You don't remember?
I don't remember who it was. I hope it wasn't either of those 2 fellows because that was a foolish thing to do. I forged DP camp documents for people. I did it, one time I did it very foolishly. I had 3 people, I was showing them how to do it, which was a very tricky thing. In fact, I think that my commanding officer heard about it because the next day I was taken out of it, away. We were issuing new documents to the DPs, and they had to bring in their old ones. What I was able to do was arrange an assembly line, or processing line, whereby people could slip in. I told them, I set it up, and I had the person turn in his old document at the first table, then move to the next table, or a few tables along to get the new document, which meant that anybody could walk in at the second stage and get new documents. But somebody came to me, and this may have been a trap, and said, "Well, look, I have this fake document, but the height there doesn't match my height." So I showed him how to erase it on a typewriter and put it in. There were 2 or 3 other people watching. Now that was a foolish thing to do. I shouldn't have done a silly little thing like 1 document when I could have gotten dozens of people. I also stole some of the documents, the finished forms.
From
the United States Army. I kept them in my footlocker in my room. I was scared or anything. I didn't know whether to steal the copy that the individual would get together with the copy that was kept on file in the Army, so the whole pair would be missing, or steal just one and not the other. I gave them eventually to the man who was the chairman or head of one of the camps. I couldn't give it to a JDC worker, although I think one JDC worker there asked if we could have one. And I may have given 1 or 2, but I gave 3 or 4 to this head of the, I think it was the camp by the name of Huff Geismar, who struck me as being a very responsible fellow. He said he had his father coming in a few weeks. Maybe, maybe not. A document like that would be worth $700 because it was a meal ticket. And it was a way you could get quarters in the DP camp. That's why they were so valuable.
Yeah, but I see. Okay.
And then when now we had this transport coming in from Romania, they'd be in Jaeger Kaserne for a while. And then they would be regular DPs. They would have the documentation. They would be able to leave when their time came, when the Jewish Agency, which was the officially recognized immigration office, when the Jewish Agency had shipping and so on. Some of them would leave on their own. They would make arrangements to go to the States or to Cuba on their own. Some of them might have made other arrangements, either with HIAS or with JDC or with other groups, to go to some other country. Mm-hmm. A handful would go into the German economy and go through all the processing and so on. The ones who wanted to get to the United States had to get police documents certifying that they were not communists. Whether they were Nazis or not, or collaborators,
didn't bother them.
Didn't bother them. They had to get birth certificates.
How could they get birth certificates? This had to be forged.
Well, when I was there, it cost $300. I don't remember now whether it was $300 to get a Jew out of Poland into the American zone with forged documents.
$300 to whom?
American. Here and there.
Oh.
The United States, and I think the British and the French, extended the dates after which people would be classified as DPs. Originally, the DPs were only those who were found in German-occupied zones. But then when the Jews came back to Poland and were massacred in Poland, and when a lot of people were being repatriated, the occupation authorities extended the date that anybody who got to Germany by a certain date would be classified as a DP. I don't remember what that cutoff date was. Now, a Jew who was late coming back to Poland. Instantly, a lot of non-Jews became Jews. I heard a story from a software who was doing some work for me in New York, that he had met one Jewish NKVD agent in Russia. And this NKVD agent, back in 1945-46, when the Jews were just going back en masse from the work camps into Poland to try to go back home, they were being repatriated, which was legal. Mm-hmm. He joined them. And he took some friends with him, non-Jewish friends. When they got to Poland, they took a name off a tombstone, the same as you do in the United States to get a social security number. Name off a tombstone or whatever. You go to the city clerk. Depending on what the going rate is, you can get a birth certificate. In the United States now you can do it. You can get I think now in order to get Social Security, a Social Security identification, all you need is a birth certificate, which is very easy to get. I think they clamped down when they discovered how easy it was. But you can do that. Now, there was $300. I think that $300 involved getting documentation from Poland that you had a clean record, that you weren't a communist. Nazi again, could have been. You weren't a communist, that you were born in this Polish town, and that your grandfather was known to the city clerk who signed it. And then to get another document that you were a resident of this DP camp as of date so-and-so, which conveniently was before the cutoff date. And I think you had to get some document from the local German police that you had never been arrested for anything. Now, of course, you might have been arrested for giving out, for sassing back a Nazi officer. In that case, you couldn't get a clean bill of health. That's this whole scandal with the investigation of Germans, this Ryan in Queens, you may have heard of, and all the others. They got the documentation the United States authorities wanted. He was guaranteed not a communist. And a criminal, there was a case I remember, 1950, where some woman was caught in the United States who had a criminal record in Germany. It was when had to go up to Congress for a congressman to give her a special bill to permit her entrance into her remaining in the United States. She had a criminal record because she resisted arrest by the Nazi police. That's how group action operates. So you can only fight it. I think of that sort can only be fought using similar criminal techniques. Even though it's legal, it's still criminal. Mm-hmm. The governments can be criminal also, as we found out. So for the $300, I think a person could get all the documentation to take him all the way from Poland to the United States. And that would be spread at different levels.
Did you ever help facilitate this type of activity?
There are times when I would refer people. Even that was very dangerous. Because if I had been caught, like this other chaplain, he'd be sent home. Wouldn't end up in jail, but he'd be sent home and your effectiveness would be destroyed.
But the Army knew that what you were doing, a lot of illegal activities.
I'm sure they knew or suspected.
So it was just simply, if you went beyond a certain point, Then they would have good reason to throw you out.
Yes, or if anything was put in writing. That's something I didn't know, but I found that now with even President of the United States, he made a promise. So some congressman said, put it in writing. Here a man gets up, Nixon, makes a promise over TV and radio he's going to do something, and Congress says, put it in writing. And that confirmed what I had learned previously. When I was leaving, when I left the Army, I planned to go to Israel. I didn't tell anybody. I think I told Abe Hyman, because he arranged for my discharge, legally discharged.
Right.
I mentioned it to him. But then when I was processing some of my papers, one guy looks at it and says, hey, Chaplain, you didn't return this thing that you got from us a couple of months ago. You don't return that, we're going to chase you all the way to Israel and find out. And get it back from you. Nothing was in writing that I was going to Israel. See, I arranged for my discharge to be in Germany, and I think I got a letter of employment either from the Jewish agency or joint that I was going to work for them. On those grounds, the only grounds that you could be discharged in a foreign country was if you had employment. I got this letter of employment. The guy who gave me the letter of employment knew it was fake. Same as a fictitious marriage to give somebody citizenship. He knew it was a fake. Hyman knew it was a fake. Hyman's in Israel, I think, now.
He's in America doing research right now.
No, if you see him, give him my regards.
Is it the Roger Williams Hotel in New York?
Oh, maybe I'll look him up. Because I made several attempts to look him up in Israel. You can tell him that I remember him with affection and respect and admiration.
Oh. Roger Williams.
I don't think I'd recognize him anymore. I may have an old picture that I could give him. I think I have one picture of him. He knew. Of course, he said, why do you want to get out? Why don't you go home? So I leveled with him. I have an idea that my commanding officer knew. But as long as it wasn't in writing, everybody's nose was clean.
Mm-hmm.
Because the guy who inspects, again, like the customs official, doesn't go down to the bottom. He looks at the papers. At the main headquarters, they look through the papers. An accountant looks at the papers. As long as the papers are okay, he isn't required to go that further step. So that as far as my commanding officer, nothing there said that I was being discharged to go to Israel. You mean he went to Israel? My papers say he was working for a Jewish agency. I don't know what happened to him after we discharged him. But we discharged him on the basis of this document.
Right.
Now check this document.
Right.
Don't check me.
Right. They weren't responsible once you were out.
And as long as it wasn't written down. I went to a supply depot. So I wasn't wise in the ways of the Army because I had not had any military experience. I had been in chaplain school for a month and I went right into the Army.
Mm-hmm.
But fellows in the Army learn these things. There are certain ways that they issue equipment where you don't have to return it, and others where you do have to return it. And somebody told me that may have been one of my soldiers in my office who said, I hear you're going to Israel. Go to the quartermaster and I'll arrange for you to get this stuff issued. It's some technical term, I forget what, which means you don't have to return it. So I went there and the guy said, oh yeah, you're the chaplain that's going there. And so-and-so told us to give you this stuff. Issue so-and-so, this classification, what you'll have to have. So I got myself a canteen, a few other innocuous items, because I was going to travel very light to Israel.
Mm-hmm.
I had to carry everything I wanted, but I think I got a canteen and a few other silly little things. And he said, hope you enjoy yourself in Israel. I hear there's a lot of fighting going on there. I guess you have your reasons for going. But as long as it wasn't written down, everything was all right.
Fine. Is there anything else before we conclude that you would like that I haven't touched on that you feel that should be discussed?
Well, I think the ideas that I mentioned in that article, which was written when I was fresh out of Israel from Hagesha, I think the way that I described the DPs, even though it may not be of current value, I think it shows what can happen and what does not have to happen to people who've been through that sort of suffering. And it explains, I hadn't read the article for several years. I know I had it, but I hadn't reread it. I think it explains a lot of the attitudes of the people, what they had been through, what Israel and Palestine before that had meant to them. So I think that the if there's any positive thing to be learned from that, I think that would be it. The way that these people, given a chance, because I could see them being rehabilitated in Israel.
Mhm.
Some weren't, but some people who were raised, you might say, with all the advantages, end up on the wrong side of.
Sure.
But the rest, well, it's a matter of the impact it had on me. I think I was about 1 out of 2 or 3 dozen people, Americans, who worked both with the DPs and then went on to Israel. So that actually I have participated in the 2 greatest historical events of our time, which gives me consolation once in a while.
Okay.
How much consolation I need, that's between me and my psychoanalyst.
Fine, thank you very much.